The subject of this lesson is one of the most exciting and important because it shows the real importance of the ribbons. You will learn how to change at runtime the attributes of a control, such as label, image, and visible, for example. You will see that this is done in a very simple way, using the gets. With the gets, we can get external values, using the functions to change the appearance or states of a control. With the get label, we obtain a value for the label. With the get enable, we can enable or disable it. With the get image, we attach a picture. For each get, we associate a function that will translate what was programmed, returning the appropriate value. Now, imagine that I'm creating a button to open a customer form, and that this button, in a given situation, has to be disabled. For this, I'll use the getEnable, calling for an appropriate function. Pretend that I programmed this function to identify the user that will use the application. For example, if the user John is using the application, the function should assign the value false to the getEnable, disabling the button, and the same function should give the value true to the getEnable, enabling the button for other users. The gets used in all the controls are triggered automatically when the ribbon is first loaded. It makes sense, right? Because the ribbon can only be loaded when all values have been assigned for the controls. After loading the ribbon, we can, in any part of the programming, request the gets to be triggered again, so we can assign new values to the controls. We can require modification of the whole ribbon or request changes to specific controls. To be able to ask for new changes after the ribbon is loaded, we need to move the ribbon for the memory, what we call move it to the cache. This is done through the onload attribute of the custom tag that calls for a function. This function, then, takes care of moving the ribbon for the memory. I will demonstrate it to you through the example application Maestro. The use of the most commonly used gets are getEnable, getLabel, getVisible. The getImage will be presented at the fourth video class. The getLabel is used in the Maestro to perform the exchange of the application language. The getVisible and the getEnable are used to assess the states of each control depending on the user logged. This ribbon will be used by the form Customers Registration. Note that the labels have been omitted, because their values will be used by the getLabel, that will get the names used according to the language loaded. Let's look at how the controls are set. Note that all keys are with the getEnable and the getLabel. The group set up with the getLabel, and the tab set up with the get label. We will then open the application Maestro. User admin, password admin. As I loaded with the user administrator, I have access to the entire application. Well, I set the permissions of the user Avelino so he doesn't have access to suppliers form and the info form. The security group is only for the administrator user, so it should be disabled too. Now we load the user Avelino. 1234 is the password. Note that the suppliers form and the security groups are hidden. The info button is disabled. This was all possible thanks to the gets configured in the appropriate controls. Note that in the Ribbon Customers form, some controls have been disabled for the user Avelino, restricting some operations with this form. Let's get back to the user admin. You have just seen in action the get visible and the get enable. Let's see now, in action, the get label, changing the application language. Note that when we change the language, the ribbon changes immediately. Now we choose the English language. Note the Ribbon Customers form loaded with the English language. The report ribbon is also in English. Let's change it to Spanish. Look at the ribbon in Spanish. Nuevo, cerrar. The report ribbon is also in Spanish. We will now know some of the functions that allow the use of the ribbons at runtime. These two variables are used in the function below to move the ribbons for the memory. This function here loads the customer form ribbon, and this one loads the main ribbon. These functions are performed by the ribbon by the onload attribute of the custom tag. Remember? Without this loading into memory, you cannot reconfigure the ribbons at runtime. Here's the function getVisible. And here, the function getEnable. I tried to talk about them as much as possible so that you could understand how they were programmed. Here is the function getLabel. It identifies the language loaded and then selects, from a table, the corresponding name to load the label control. Let's look at two tables. The language table and the tbl-conf. Here, keep the number corresponding to the language to be loaded by the maestro. 0 for the Portuguese, 1 for English, 2 for Spanish. The language table stores all the labels controls of the ribbons in the 3 languages. The important here is that I associate each label to an exclusive ID control in the ribbon, so that the function getLabel can easily identify the label control that made the request in the chosen language. Now we see the application of the methods invalidate_control, the variables that stores the ribbons in the memory and allow us to reconfigure the ribbons at runtime. In the form login, use the methods in the event by clicking OK. In the event, click. So, after the user be identified and load the system, we can reconfigure the ribbon. Note that I'm using the method invalidateControl to validate each of the controls. But in this process, we must validate all the controls. So, we can simply use the invalidate method, which is more convenient and simple. I used the invalidate control here just to show you how to use this method. Let's practice the method invalidateControl in the form that makes the exchange of language so you can remember how it's used. See, here I'm using the invalidateControl method to revalidate all the controls of the main ribbon. Before revalidating, I save the selected language number at the table conf. Now, imagine that I need in this procedure to change just one of the ribbon's control. I just have to use the invalidate control. For example, let's revalidate just the exit button. Ribbon object, invalidate control. We identify the button by its exclusive ID, btexit. Note that when we change the language, only the exit button is changed. Look, the exit button. After the revalidation request, the close button will trigger the getLabel attribute that will consequently trigger the getLabel function. Let's see the function and the execution when the button is revalidated. We put some breakpoints to follow the function process. Let's select the language that will require the button revalidation. That will trigger the get attribute of the button, which will call for the function getLabel. The function then will identify the loaded language that will get the button label at the language table through a filtering using the exclusive control ID. It identified that the language is English, so it will give the button label the name Close. See Close in the label. Notice that when we load the customer's form, its language changes too. It has nothing to do with the ribbons, but I've made a code at the form so you can study how the language changes are made. At the fourth video class, I'll teach you about loading external images. Thank you very much for watching this class.